Please end it fast." Her voice cracked with fear, trembling as though the very sound cost her strength. The rancher raised his eyes, and what he saw staring back at him felt like the devil himself. Sarah Miller hung helpless from a thick branch in the middle of the forest, her wrists bound wide apart with coarse rope that cut deep into her skin. Another rope bit into her neck, forcing her to strain upward with her trembling arms or else be strangled. Her bare feet dangled inches above the dirt, toes curling at nothing, clawing for the ground that would not come. Sweat and dirt clung to her skin, blood smeared across her bruised legs, her knees swelling dark like fire under her flesh. Each gasp came broken, rattling barely enough to keep her alive. If you're watching this, subscribe and let me know where you're watching from. This story gets much more intense, and I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. The woods were quiet. Only the sound of the rope creaking with each movement and Sarah's muffled sobs broke the silence. She wasn't alone. Just a few steps away, leaning against the trunk of another tree, Mark Johnson stood watching. Once, people had called him a hard-working rancher. But that man was gone. What remained was something darker, something that smiled at another person's pain. His eyes gleamed in the dim light, steady and sharp like a predator waiting for its prey to weaken. He lifted a silver flask to his mouth, took a slow drink, then smirked as Sarah struggled harder against the ropes. "You see, Sarah," he whispered, his tone calm but sharp enough to cut. "This isn't about killing you fast. It's about watching you break, inch by inch, until there's nothing left." He stepped closer, boots crunching over the leaves. His finger traced the rope that bit into her throat. She flinched at the touch, air hitching as though her lungs might burst. His chuckle was low and cruel, the kind of sound that made the darkness feel colder. "This rope's my favorite. Every time you get weaker, it tightens. So go on, fight. Keep fighting. I want to see you struggle. I want to watch your spirit die." Her arms burned. Her muscles screamed. Her throat clawed for air. She tried to cry out, but her voice cracked, drowned by tears streaking through the dirt on her face. Mark leaned back against a log, sharpening a knife, humming without tune, eyes never leaving her. At times he laughed softly, shaking his head like this was a show meant only for him. Other times he muttered words sharp enough to cut her soul. "She thought she could leave me. She thought she could walk away. Nobody leaves Mark. Nobody." Sarah whispered for mercy, lips cracked and dry, though she knew he'd never give it. He crouched in front of her, shadow stretching long across her body. His hand slid under her chin, forcing her head up. His touch was ice. "You look beautiful like this," he said, poison dripping from every word. Fragile, helpless. Her heart raced in terror, but somewhere beneath it all, a spark refused to go out. She wanted to scream, to curse him, but her voice was gone. He saw it anyway, that faint flame in her eyes, and it only twisted his grin wider. "Don't you quit yet," he said, stepping back, his boots heavy on the leaves. "I want to see the exact moment you give in. That's the sweetest part." Hours passed like years. The moon slid slowly across the sky while Sarah's body trembled, torn between life and collapse. The ropes dug deeper, burning her skin, cutting so sharp she knew the marks would never leave. She thought this would be the end. Her strength was nearly gone. Then came the sound. Boot steps. Slow, steady, crunching through the forest floor. Sarah froze. Her heart stopped. For a moment, she thought Mark had returned after drifting away. But then, out of the shadows, a man stepped into the pale light. John Dawson. Folks called him John, near 50, broad across the shoulders, a man weathered by long years beneath the sun. His face was marked with lines of hardship, his presence calm but steady, the kind of man who carried the weight of too much life behind him. John wasn't perfect, but he had something most didn't, a stubborn heart that refused to turn away when others would. His eyes found Sarah hanging there. The sight struck him like a bullet. His jaw tightened, his hand gripped his rifle, but his voice was low, steady. "My God," he muttered. "This isn't cruelty. This is evil." He let the rifle fall to the dirt and ran forward. His knife slashed through the ropes. Sarah collapsed into his arms, gasping as the weight on her neck vanished, lungs pulling in sharp, desperate breaths. For the first time all night, she felt air without pain. John held her steady. "Easy now," he said roughly, but with warmth that made the words real. "You're safe. I've got you." But safety out here never lasted. The crack of a gun split the air. Bark flew from a tree just inches from John's head. Mark had returned, rifle in hand, fury burning in his eyes. "Put her down, Dawson." Mark's voice thundered from the tree line. "She's mine." John shoved Sarah behind him, raised his revolver, and fired. His bullet struck dirt near Mark's boots, forcing him back into cover. "Run," John hissed to Sarah, grabbing her arm and dragging her toward the horse tied nearby. She stumbled, barely able to stand, but the urgency in his voice gave her strength. Another shot rang out. John grunted as a bullet tore across his side, ripping fabric, burning flesh. Still he moved, hauling Sarah to the saddle. He swung her up, mounted behind, and kicked the horse hard. The animal bolted, hooves hammering the dirt, branches whipping across their faces. Gunshots cracked through the morning air. Mark's furious shouts echoed through the trees, promising he would not stop until Sarah was his again. She clung to John, tears and sweat mixing, her chest pounding with fear and relief all at once. She knew one thing Mark didn't. She'd rather die than ever return to him. The forest roared past them. Smoke and dust filled the air. Behind them, rage chased them, closer than either dared to admit. Footsteps, slow, steady, crunching through the forest floor. Sarah froze. Her heart lurched, beating so fast it hurt. For a moment, she thought Mark had circled back again, ready to finish his twisted game. Her breath caught in her throat, and she pressed herself against the rough bark of the tree, praying for a miracle. From the shadows stepped John Dawson. He was older, close to 50, broad-shouldered, carrying the weight of too many years of sun and sorrow. His face showed lines of hard living, but there was a steadiness in him, the kind of calm that came from having survived storms before. He wasn't a saint, but he had something that mattered in places like this. Enough stubbornness to step forward when everyone else would turn away. When his eyes found Sarah hanging there, it struck him harder than any bullet ever could. He stopped dead in his tracks. For a heartbeat, his chest tightened and his stomach twisted. "Dear God," he whispered, voice hoarse. "What kind of man does this?" He let his rifle drop into the dirt and rushed forward. His hunting knife sliced through the ropes at her wrists, his hands rough but careful. Sarah gasped as the weight on her neck vanished. Her legs buckled, but he caught her before she hit the ground. The moment her lungs filled without the rope choking her, she sobbed, clutching at his shirt with trembling hands. "Easy now," he said, voice low and gentle in a way that didn't match his weathered frame. "You're safe. I've got you." She clung to him, too weak to stand. For the first time in hours, she felt human again. Touch, warmth, the promise that maybe she wouldn't die alone in the dark. Her chest rose and fell against his, tears soaking into his jacket. John held her like he was afraid she'd shatter if he loosened his grip. But the forest wasn't about to give them peace. The crack of a rifle tore the air. A tree just inches from John's head exploded with splinters. He dropped with Sarah in his arms, his instincts kicking in before thought could catch up. Mark's voice bellowed from the shadows, raw with fury. "Put her down, Dawson. She's mine." John shoved Sarah behind him, eyes locked on the tree line. His revolver came up quick, and he fired back. Dirt leapt near Mark's boots, forcing him into cover. John's jaw tightened, breath heavy, but his voice stayed calm. "Run," he muttered to Sarah. She tried, her knees giving out, but the urgency in his tone pushed her forward. He dragged her toward the horse tied to a low branch nearby. Another shot cracked, and John grunted as fire ripped across his side, tearing flesh. His face twisted in pain, but he didn't stop. He boosted Sarah onto the saddle, mounted behind her with a groan, and slapped the reins hard. The horse reared, then tore down the trail, hooves pounding like thunder in the still morning air. Branches whipped against their clothes, the air thick with dust and gun smoke. Mark's shouting carried through the trees, his voice like a curse that clung to the wind. You can't take her from me. She's mine. Sarah's fingers dug into John's coat, clinging for dear life. Her heart pounded against her ribs, torn between fear and something close to hope. For the first time in months, she wasn't just running from death. She was riding toward the possibility of freedom. Behind them, Mark's bullets snapped through the trees, missing by feet, then inches. John's arm pressed against his bleeding side, each jolt of the saddle stabbing fire through his body. Still, he leaned forward and spoke close to Sarah's ear. "Hold on tight," he rasped. "We just need to put some distance between us and that bastard." The horse charged faster. Steam poured from its nostrils in the cool dawn air. Sarah pressed her face into John's chest, not daring to look back, not daring to believe they were safe yet. The woods echoed with fury behind them. Mark's voice carried on the wind, a promise sharp as steel. This wasn't over. And Sarah knew, deep in her bones, that he meant it. The horse tore through the trees, hooves pounding like drums, carrying Sarah and John deeper into the wild. The morning air whipped against their faces, stinging with cold and smoke from the gunfire left behind. Sarah clung to him, her arms wrapped tight around his waist, every muscle in her body trembling. She could still hear Mark's voice echoing in the distance, a howl filled with rage, promising he wouldn't stop. John leaned low over the reins, his breath ragged, one hand pressed against the wound at his side. Blood soaked his shirt, warm and sticky under his palm, but he kept his focus forward. Stopping meant death. His jaw clenched against the pain. He had seen men fall to worse, and he had sworn he wouldn't fall tonight. Not while she was still in danger. The forest thinned. Branches scratched across their arms and faces before finally breaking into a clearing. The horse slowed, foam dripping from its mouth, nostrils flaring. John pulled back on the reins, forcing himself to stay steady even as his body swayed with dizziness. He slid from the saddle with a grunt, knees buckling slightly when his boots hit the dirt. He covered it with a crooked smile. "Bullet only kissed me," he muttered, voice rough but steady. "I'll live." Sarah climbed down after him, her legs weak, shaking so hard she nearly collapsed. She caught herself on the saddle horn, then turned toward him. Her eyes were wide, shining with tears that hadn't stopped since the forest. She stared at the blood soaking through his side. "You shouldn't have risked your life for me," she whispered, her voice breaking. John sat himself down on a fallen log, grimacing as he shifted. He spat into the dirt, his weathered face tightening. "That's foolish talk. I couldn't leave you hanging back there. No man with a soul could." Sarah dropped her gaze, shame pulling her shoulders down. Her voice was low, heavy. "You don't understand. Mark, he wasn't just some stranger. He was mine once. I loved him, or I thought I did." John's eyes narrowed, his head tilting slightly as he leaned forward, listening. His breathing slowed, as if steadying himself for her truth. At first he was gentle, she continued, her voice trembling. "He made me laugh. He told me I was special, but it was a trick. I saw the real man soon enough, the games he played, the way he smiled when I begged him to stop. He fed on it, on pain. When I finally ran, I thought I'd escaped him, but he hunted me down. He said no one leaves him. And now he wants to finish what he started." John's jaw tightened, his fist clenched against his knee. "So that's why he won't quit. He doesn't see you as a person, just something he owns." His voice dropped lower, heavy with contempt. "Men like that don't love. They destroy." Sarah's tears spilled fast down her cheeks. She covered her face with her hands, whispering through broken breaths. "I'd rather die than go back." John placed his rough hand on her shoulder, steady, grounding her. She looked up at him, her eyes swollen from crying, and he held her gaze. "Then we make sure you never do. Not while I'm breathing." For a moment the world around them grew quiet. The forest hushed except for the steady sound of their breathing. Two battered souls sat side by side, held together not by choice, but by survival. Neither said it, but both knew deep down the fight wasn't over. Mark Johnson was still out there, and he was hunting. Sarah wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. Her lips trembled, but her voice carried something different now. Not just fear, but a spark of defiance. "He'll come. He won't stop. You know that, right?" John's eyes softened, though his voice stayed firm. Let him come. He shifted, wincing at the pain in his side. I've faced devils before. He's just another one. Sarah studied him, this stranger who had risked his life for her, bleeding but unshaken. And for the first time, she felt the faintest edge of safety, not the kind that promised peace, but the kind that whispered she wasn't alone anymore. And though Mark's shadow stretched over them, Sarah swore she wouldn't let it break her again. Sarah stared at the blood soaking through John's shirt, the stains spreading fast. Her breath came uneven, her chest tightening as if it were her wound, not his. She moved closer, her hands hovering near his side, afraid to touch him, afraid of making it worse. You're hurt bad, she whispered, her voice shaky. John let out a low groan, shifting on the log. He forced a grin, but faltered. I've seen worse, he said, though the strain in his voice betrayed the lie. He wiped his brow with the back of his hand, sweat dripping down despite the cool morning air. Sarah sank to her knees in front of him. Her fingers trembled as she tore a strip from the hem of her dress. She pressed it against his wound, her hands stained quickly with his blood. John hissed at the contact, his teeth gritted, but he didn't push her away. Hold still, she murmured, her voice breaking. Please. He studied her, his weathered face softening as her eyes filled again with tears. You don't have to do this, he muttered. Yes, I do. She pressed harder on the wound, fighting to steady her shaking hands. You saved me. Now it's my turn. For a while, neither spoke. The forest was quiet around them, the only sounds their uneven breaths and the rustle of leaves stirred by the morning breeze. Sarah's heart pounded. Every time she looked at his face, she saw the pain he tried so hard to hide, the way his jaw locked every time the fabric dug into the wound. And yet he stayed still, letting her care for him. You risked everything for me, she said finally, her voice quiet. Why? You don't even know me. John's gaze fell to the ground. He let out a long breath, his chest rising and falling heavily. Because I couldn't walk away. I've done that before, and it's haunted me. I've seen what happens when a man turns his back on someone who needs him. I swore I'd never do it again. Sarah blinked, surprised at the rawness in his voice. She wanted to ask more, but the weight in his eyes told her enough. He carried ghosts of his own. When she finished tying the makeshift bandage, her hands dropped in her lap. She stared at her blood-stained fingers. A shiver ran through her, not from the cold, but from the memory of Mark's hands, his voice, the way he had called her his. She wrapped her arms around herself, rocking slightly. John noticed. He leaned forward, ignoring the pain in his side. He's not here now, he said gently. You're safe, for as long as I'm breathing. Her lips trembled. You don't know him. He won't stop. He'll keep coming until... She cut herself off, her voice breaking. Until one of us is dead. John's expression hardened, but his voice stayed steady. Then let it be him. Sarah lifted her head, staring at him. She saw no bravado, no empty words, only a quiet resolve. For the first time, she believed it. But then the silence shattered. From deep in the woods, a twig snapped. Then the crunch of footsteps on gravel drifted across the clearing. Sarah stiffened, her stomach twisting into knots. She clutched John's arm. Someone's out there, she whispered. John reached for his revolver, his hand steady despite the pain. Stay behind me. His eyes swept the tree line, sharp and unblinking. The steps grew closer, deliberate, unhurried. Whoever it was didn't care about being heard. Sarah's breath came in shallow gasps, her pulse hammering in her ears. She pressed herself against John's back, every muscle taut with fear. The sound stopped. Then, from the edge of the clearing, a low laugh carried through the trees. Sarah's blood ran cold. She knew that voice. Mark stepped out from the shadows, his face half-hidden, his grin wide and cruel. His pistol gleamed in the dim light, already aimed. Well now, he drawled, his tone dripping with venom. I figured I'd find you here. Did you really think you could take her from me, Dawson? John's revolver rose, but his arm shook from the wound. He fired, but too slow. Mark's gun cracked first, the shot slamming into John's shoulder, spinning him against the wall of pain his body had become. He fell back onto the dirt, blood pouring faster now. Sarah screamed, dropping beside him, her hands desperate, frantic, trying to stop the bleeding. Mark walked forward slow, savoring every step, his pistol never wavering. "Don't worry, sweetheart," he sneered at Sarah. "I ain't going to kill him quick. Men like him deserve to suffer. Just like you did." Sarah's heart hammered, her eyes darting between the man who had saved her and the man who had destroyed her. John's face was pale, his hand twitching as he tried to lift the revolver again. And Mark smiled like he'd already won. Something inside Sarah snapped. John's head snapped toward the tree line, his revolver raised though his arm shook from blood loss. His breath was shallow, his jaw set tight. He forced himself to his feet, standing between Sarah and the sound creeping closer. The steps grew louder, measured, confident, like someone enjoying the fear they caused. Sarah's nails dug into John's sleeve, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might tear from her chest. Then the voice came, low and mocking. "You can hide, but you can't keep her from me." Sarah froze. "Mark." He emerged slowly, his figure cutting through the haze of dawn, his smile wide and cruel. The barrel of his pistol gleamed, steady in his grip. His eyes burned with something darker than anger. It was possession, obsession, a sickness that had only grown deeper. "Well now," Mark drawled, tilting his head as if savoring the moment. "Look at this little picture. Hero and damsel, bleeding and trembling in the dirt. You really thought you could steal her away, Dawson?" John's revolver lifted higher, but his arm trembled. He fired first, but the shot went wide. Pain flared through his body, knocking his aim off. Mark's pistol cracked. The bullet struck John's shoulder, spinning him back, driving him down into the dirt with a grunt. "John!" Sarah cried, dropping beside him. Her hands pressed uselessly at the wound, blood soaking her palms. Mark walked forward slowly, each step deliberate, his grin never fading. "Don't worry, sweetheart," he said, his voice slick with venom. "I ain't gonna kill him fast. Men like him deserve to bleed out slow. Just like you did." Sarah's heart thrashed against her ribs. She looked at John, his face pale, his breath ragged, his revolver slipping from his weakening hand. He tried to lift it again, teeth clenched, but his arm shook too much. And then her eyes locked on Mark, the man she once thought she loved, the man who had whispered sweet lies before revealing the devil behind them. Now he stood there, smiling at her suffering like it was his prize. Something inside her snapped. Sarah's fear, years of it, cracked open and turned to fire. She looked around wildly, her gaze landing on the heavy iron lamp sitting on the table near the cabin door. Her hand shot out, grabbing it with trembling fingers. "Stay back," she screamed, her voice raw, louder than she knew she could manage. Mark's grin widened. "Or what? You'll beg me again? You've always been good at that." Her chest heaved, her arms shook, but she didn't beg. She lifted the lamp high, tears blurring her sight, rage flooding every vein in her body. With a scream that ripped straight from her soul, Sarah swung. The iron connected with Mark's skull in a sickening crack. His grin vanished, his eyes going wide in shock. He stumbled back, one hand flying to his head. Sarah didn't stop. Every bruise, every scar, every night of terror fueled her as she struck again and again. Mark's body crumpled to the dirt, his pistol clattering from his hand. She stood over him, chest heaving, swinging until he no longer moved, until the devil's laughter was silenced once and for all. The lamp slipped from her fingers, clattering beside his body. Blood pooled beneath him, dark and final. For the first time in years, the world was quiet. Sarah's breath came in violent sobs. Her arms shook as she dropped to her knees, staring at what she had done, at the man who had haunted her every step lying broken at her feet. Then she heard a groan. "John!" She crawled back to him, her tears streaming fresh as she cradled his face. His eyes fluttered open, dull with pain but alive. "It's over," he rasped, his voice barely more than a whisper. Sarah looked down at him, then back at Mark's still body. Her chest tightened. Was it really over? Or had the shadow of what he'd done carved itself so deep that it would never leave her? She pressed her forehead against John's, trembling. "We survived," she whispered. "That's enough for now." Outside, the sky began to lighten, the first streaks of dawn pushing against the dark. But the night's scars lingered heavy in both their hearts. The sound of those steps dragged across Sarah's nerves like a blade. Her breath caught, her pulse thudding so hard it made her chest ache. She clung tighter to John's sleeve, her nails biting into the fabric. Every instinct screamed to her to run, but her legs were heavy, weak, useless. John steadied himself, his hand gripping the revolver, though his arm trembled from blood loss. His face was pale, sweat slicking his forehead, but his eyes stayed sharp. He tilted his head slightly, listening, waiting. "Stay behind me," he whispered, low but firm. The footsteps drew closer, each one slow, deliberate, like whoever was wanted them to hear. The woods, already tense, seemed to close in tighter, every shadow alive. Sarah pressed herself against John's back, her whole body shaking. Then the sound stopped. For a heartbeat, there was nothing, no wind, no bird song, only the pounding of Sarah's heart. A laugh cut through the silence. Low, cruel, familiar. Her blood froze. Mark stepped from the shadows, a pistol in his hand, and a grin stretched across his face like he owned the earth they stood on. His eyes glimmered with sick pleasure, his posture relaxed, as though this were nothing more than a casual meeting between old friends. "Well now," he said, his voice smooth and mocking. "What a picture. You two huddled together like scared little mice. You really thought you could steal her away from me, Dawson?" John's revolver came up. His hand shook, but he fired anyway. The shot snapped through the clearing, but it went wide, tearing bark from a tree. Mark didn't even flinch. His pistol cracked in return, the bullet slamming into John's shoulder. The force spun him sideways and sent him crashing to the ground. "John!" Sarah screamed, dropping beside him. She pressed her hands to the wound, blood warm and slick under her palms. Her cries tore from her chest, raw and desperate. Mark walked forward slowly, savoring every step, his pistol never lowering. "Don't worry, sweetheart," he drawled. "I'm not going to kill him quick. Men like him deserve to bleed out, just like you did." Sarah's hands shook as she tried to stop the bleeding. Her heart pounded so loud it drowned out everything else. She looked at John's face, pale, drawn tight with pain, his lips moving as he tried to speak. His revolver lay inches from his hand, but he couldn't lift it. His strength was slipping fast. Then she turned her eyes on Mark, the man she had once trusted, the man who had whispered sweet words in her ear before showing her the monster behind them. He stood there now, smiling at her suffering, drinking in like it was a reward. Something inside Sarah broke, and then reformed into something stronger. The fear that had ruled her for so long cracked open, replaced by fury so sharp it burned through her veins. Her eyes darted around the room. Her hand landed on the heavy iron lamp sitting on the table. She grabbed it, the weight grounding her. Her arms shook, but not with fear this time, with rage. "Stay back," she screamed, her voice ragged, carrying all the years of pain she'd buried. Mark laughed, tilting his head. "Or what? You'll beg? That's all you're good for." Her chest heaved, her grip tightening on the lamp. And then, with a scream that ripped from the depths of her soul, she swung. The iron smashed against Mark's skull with a sickening crack. His grin vanished. His eyes went wide in shock as he staggered. Sarah swung again, and again. Every memory of his cruelty, every night she'd spent terrified, every scar he'd left on her body and her heart, each one drove her arm harder. Mark collapsed to the dirt, his pistol slipping from his grasp. She didn't stop until he lay still, blood pooling beneath him. The lamp clattered from her hands, her arms shaking violently. Her chest rose and fell in sobs. She stared down at him, at the man who had haunted her, now broken and silent. For the first time in years, she felt the weight of his shadow lift. Then she heard it, a weak groan. "John!" She crawled back to him, tears streaming, her blood-stained hands cupping his face. His eyes fluttered open, dim but alive. "You did it," he whispered, his voice faint. Sarah bent her forehead to his, sobbing. "No," she whispered. "We did it." The world around them was quiet again. The only sound was the fragile rhythm of their breathing. Two lives battered, but not destroyed. Dawn light pressed through the trees, soft and golden, as if the world itself had shifted. But Sarah knew this wasn't the end. The scars would stay, carved deep into both of them. Still, for the first time, she felt something stronger than fear. She felt free. The cabin was quiet except for the sound of Sarah's breathing. She sat on the floor beside John, her hands trembling as she pressed a strip of cloth against his bleeding shoulder. The iron lamp she had used on Mark lay a few feet away, now smeared with blood. Her chest rose and fell in hard, uneven breaths. John tried to act strong, forcing a crooked smile even as his face went pale. "Don't fuss, girl," he muttered, his voice rough. "I've had worse. Bar fight in Abilene nearly broke my ribs once." Sarah shook her head, tears streaking her cheeks. "Don't pretend, John. You're hurt bad. I can see it." His grin faded, his jaw tightening as another wave of pain hit him. Still, he kept his eyes steady on hers. "I'm not leaving you here. That's the truth." Sarah pressed harder on the wound, and he winced. She hated seeing him hurt. He had risked everything for her, and now she was scared she'd lose him before she could even thank him for what he'd done. Then a sound cut through the night. A faint crunch of gravel outside the cabin. Slow, heavy, measured. Sarah froze, her whole body going stiff. Her eyes shot to John's. "Stay quiet," he whispered, his hand reaching for his revolver though it trembled badly. The door creaked open, and a cold wind slipped through the gap. There he was, Mark. His shadow filled the doorway, his grin stretched wide, blood dried on his face but his eyes alive with rage. His voice dripped with venom. "Well now, didn't I tell you? You can't steal her away from me, Dawson." John raised his revolver, but his arm was weak, shaking from blood loss. Mark fired first. The shot slammed into John's chest, knocking him back against the wall. "John!" Sarah screamed, rushing to him. Blood soaked through his shirt faster than before. Mark stepped inside, each step slow, savoring the sight of her panic. His gun stayed pointed steady, his grin unshaken. "Don't cry, sweetheart. I ain't gonna kill him quick. Men like him deserve to suffer, same as you." Sarah's breath came fast and shallow. She looked at John, his eyes half shut, his lips moving as he fought to stay awake. She looked back at Mark, the man who had once told her she was his world, now standing over her like the devil himself. Something inside her shifted. Her fear burned away. She felt only fire. Her eyes darted around. Her hand landed on the iron lamp again. She grabbed it, the weight heavy and real in her grip. Mark laughed, shaking his head. "That won't save you." Sarah rose to her feet, her whole body shaking, but her voice steady for the first time in years. "I don't need saving. Not anymore." She swung with all her strength. The lamp smashed into Mark's head with a crack. He stumbled, eyes wide with shock. Sarah screamed, swinging again and again. All the pain he had caused, all the nights of fear, all the bruises and scars, she poured them into each strike. Mark collapsed to the floor, his pistol slipping from his hand. She didn't stop until he was still, blood pooling beneath him. Her chest heaved, tears streamed down her face. She dropped the lamp, her hands raw and trembling. She turned back to John, collapsing beside him. His eyes opened slowly, weak but alive. A faint smile tugged at his lips. "You saved me," he whispered. Sarah shook her head, pressing her forehead to his. "No, we saved each other." The night pressed heavy around them, but for the first time, Sarah felt something break free inside her. She had taken her life back. The fear that had ruled her for so long was gone. She was no longer his victim. She was a survivor. The first light of dawn crept through the cracks in the cabin walls. Dust floated in the pale beams, softening the sharp edges of the long night. Sarah sat by John's side, her hand stained with his blood as she tightened the cloth around his shoulder. He tried to sit straighter, giving her that half-smile of his, but she could see how much it cost him. His skin was pale, his breath uneven, yet his eyes stayed steady on her. "Don't worry so much," he muttered, his voice rough but still carrying warmth. "Takes more than a bullet to finish me." Sarah gave a shaky laugh, though tears blurred her sight. "You don't have to act strong. Not with me. For a long moment, they sat in silence, listening to the quiet of the ranch. Outside, the wind rattled the shutters, carrying away the last echoes of Mark's fury. Inside, the air felt heavy, but not with fear anymore, with release. Sarah looked at Mark's still body on the floor. The man who had haunted her dreams, the one who had stolen her freedom, who had tried to break her spirit, gone. She stared at him for a moment, then closed her eyes. It wasn't victory she felt. It was relief. She turned back to John, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "I thought I'd never be free," she whispered. "He made me believe I was nothing, that I couldn't fight back." John shifted, his good hand reaching for hers. His grip was rough, but steady. "You proved him wrong. You're stronger than he ever knew." Her lips trembled. "I didn't feel strong. I felt broken." He squeezed her hand, his gaze firm. "Sometimes strength isn't about never breaking. It's about what you do after. You stood up. You fought. That's what matters." Sarah's tears fell freely then, but they weren't only tears of pain. They carried something else: release, healing, the first trace of hope she had felt in years. She helped John to his feet, supporting his weight as they stepped outside. The prairie stretched before them, endless and gold under the rising sun. The cool morning air filled her lungs, clean and sharp, washing away the darkness of the night. For the first time, Sarah didn't feel the shadow of Mark behind her. She felt the horizon open wide, full of choices, full of life. She leaned against John, her hand resting lightly on his arm. He looked at her with tired eyes, his smile faint but real. "You're not alone anymore," he said. Sarah nodded, her voice quiet but certain. "And I'll never be again." Together they stood, battered but unbroken, two souls who had faced hell and refused to stay in it. And maybe that's the lesson worth holding on to, that even in the darkest places, even when cruelty feels stronger, the human spirit can rise. It can say no. It can fight back. Sarah had been a victim, but as the sun rose higher, painting the land in light, she knew who she was now: a survivor. And with John beside her, she knew she would never face the world alone again.